Listen to another episode of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Hello. Nice, cold, rainy day out there, unless you're listening from a far place. I have Matthew Lucci here. He's running for the Republican primary in District 25, and I've got a lot of questions. This is the first time we met, and I have several questions about what the purpose, what he's running for, what the policies he stands for, things of that nature. You're from Venus, you said earlier.
Yep, right down the road in Venus, Texas.
Yeah, Venus High School and all that?
I was actually homeschooled.
Oh, really? Okay. At DBU, I get probably about at least a quarter or more of my students are homeschooled. That's become very, very common these days. I've been wanting to do a show on that, but being a public school teacher, I have some questions about it, but they're legitimate questions, whatever. But that's probably for another day. But we're going to talk about, what possessed you to run, because running is a very arduous experience, I would imagine. And if you are fortunate enough to be elected to Congress, that's a very arduous experience. But before we jump into all that and this background and whatnot, I'm going to talk about the sponsors real quick so we can get to the highlight of the show here. Thank you to Our Place Restaurant. Have you ever been to Our Place?
I've been to Our Place many times.
There you go. It's a good place. And what I like about Our Place, it's a very, besides the food and the service is always great, it's a very eclectic place, so to speak. It's what you want in a hometown. You go in there and it's a very diverse audience and whatever else. And so people must feel comfortable to go there, and I really enjoy it a lot.
They also have a really good chicken fried steak.
Yes, they do. It's what
I'm not allowed to endorse products.
No, you can. You can endorse Our Place all you want. So no, I usually there for breakfast, but when I am there for lunch, it is chicken fried steak because it really is good. Also, thank you to Wild Cigar. Are you a cigar smoker by any chance?
I am not. Never smoked.
Well, you need to learn how. Anyway, this is a cigar bar over off the Standard, off of Hidden Creek, and it's got a huge humidor, and so people come from long, long places to come to there to check out their humidor. But also, it has a very nice bar, and it's a good place to go. It's not loud, it's whatever. I know they're going to have the playoff games on this weekend. But it's not a sports bar. It's a place you can actually have a conversation, and that's what I like about it. So thank you, Chris and Nathan over at Wild Cigar. Also, here's something you might want to consider putting an ad in, because this really gets a lot of attention. Local Life magazine. It's not just an ad magazine. They do local articles as well. And I just was texting with Tiffany Nico, who owns this outfit, and she'll be on the show in about 5 weeks because she does other things as well. But this goes to 30,000 homes. And also, you go to a lot of the retail establishments, and there's several copies, and people will, while they're waiting on something, will look through them. So that gets a lot of coverage, so it's something to consider. Also, thank you to Southern Gym. Maybe Mrs. Lucci would like to see Southern Gym. Have you been here before?
I have not been to Southern Gym.
It's very, very nice. My wife works here, so I know a lot about it, but Gayla Morris is the owner, and she knows her jewelry. And it's very nice. She can make a custom piece. She can repair a piece. She can design a piece. And they have inventory, obviously. And it's very, very, it's just a nice place, very Southern. In fact, on February 8th, she's going to have bourbon and bling. And so she'll have some high quality stuff, not just jewelries, but something for the men to peruse the merchandise with, But anyway, Southern Gym is very, very nice. And again, a lot of people travel a long way to go to Southern Gym. So it's also at the Standard right next to American Revelry. And if you need something to be done for your office or home to be clean, to be thoroughly clean, talk to Two Maids. Talk to Brenda Ramirez at Two Maids. They do quite a range area, rather. I mean, they'll go to Waxahachie, they go to Hillsborough, they go to Granbury. So they will go along places to get to your business or office. I know that Gala uses them. And I'm a member of a networking group here in town, and several of our networking group uses her because they really think she does a great job. And what she does that's really interesting to me is that rather than saying it's X amount per hour or so much for a job, basically what you're going to have is you rate how good a job they did, and they'll base the bill on that. So the number is 817-764-0733. So give her a try, and you'll find out you'll be glad you did. Also, another local business, Old Pro Roofing, and my buddy John Williams, 817-734-2756. it's nice to know when it's raining like this, your roof is solid because you don't have to worry about the leaks. And John checked mine out a few months ago, said I was good to go, and I'll have him come out. You need to have your roof checked once a year. You know, you may look at it and say, that looks fine, but he'll tell you yes or no. Also, another local business, Camco Mortgage, Sammy Campbell, Candy Gal. You can get Sammy at 817-778-4592, and you can also get Candy at 817-925-2661. They've been dealing with this for a couple of decades, and they've done refinanced my house a couple of times to pay for bills and repairs and all this other business. So there you go. Also, I remind you, on the 2nd of February, we have, for Fitability TX, we have a big fundraiser at Lost Oak. This is a pretty good outfit. What Fitability does, what Jessica does, Jessica Valley Reams, is she does fitness programs for people with mental disabilities, autism or whatnot. And I've been out there for her studio. It's only about half a block from where I live practically. And it's really kind of touching to watch her work with these people. And they're having a big fundraiser. There's tables still available. There's tickets still available. And go out there, Lost Oak, have a glass of wine, and they'll have some music. Susie and the Sissies, Susie Morgan and her crew will be there, so that'll be a lot of fun. There's a lot going on. There actually is. So we're really in the thick of things. So let's get to the point here. First of all, just a little bit of background about yourself, your education, what you do for a job, whatever else you care to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Brad, again, thank you very much for having me on.
No problem.
I grew up right down the road in Venus, Texas. I was born in Fort Worth. My family moved down to Venus when I was about 2 years old. Mm-hmm. Grew up down there, second of 7 kids. My mom was a preschool teacher, and my dad was a trucker and delivery driver. My mom homeschooled all 7 of us. And as a result of that, we usually got to get out and about a lot more than most public school kids. So we used to go camping all the time at Cleburne State Park, out in Mineral Wells, out in, about by Palo Duro Canyon, out in West Texas and all that. But when I was probably middle school, high school age, whatever, we started playing baseball all over the place. I used to play baseball in Venus and in Burleson, and we'd play against all the other little towns, which was really fun. After that, I went off to college at SMU in Dallas and got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, minored in math, and then went off to grad school at UT Tyler, where I'm on faculty as an adjunct professor teaching mechanical engineering classes now.
It's interesting. Well, my son's an electrical engineer for Boeing, which has been in the news a lot lately. But anyway, he doesn't work in that area, so his job's safe, I hope. But that's interesting because, mechanical engineering, is not typically a background that somebody who wants a career in politics goes into. Usually they were political science majors, history majors, liberal arts of some sort. And so, but you come from this kind of like the other side, the left brain and right brain thing going on. So, now you live in District 25, the new District 25, I found out. I knew it had been redrawn. I did not know, I remembered it included Arlington now, and that's where you're from, right? Or live now?
Yeah, my wife and I live in Arlington. My beautiful wife, Jen, we've been married for about 8 months now, been together for 3. She's the absolute love of my life, and I hope that she's listening.
Oh, I'd hope so too.
Anyway, she's one of my biggest cheerleaders and a big support system, always pointing me to Christ, and was a big influence in making sure that we jumped into this race. We live in Arlington now, in a district that now stretches from Arlington out to Abilene. We have some Abilene addresses in there. 13 counties across North and Northwest Texas. It's an enormous district.
Right, and for us old timers, I remember District 25 was more north than south. All the way down to West Austin practically. But it was redrawn, and I am sure there was some motivation for that. For the Republicans to redraw it and all that, but. That's a lot of work. I mean, that's one thing about campaigning. When I teach my classes about, this is an arduous experience because you've got to be working at 24/7.
Yeah.
Fundraising, appearances, communication, whatever else. And it's great that your wife is on board with this, but it's still. I think people need to appreciate what it takes to go through this process. And I guess when we talk about Roger Williams, Roger Williams is nobody's idea of a liberal, okay? what is it about his policies that inspired you to do this? I mean, you must have some disagreements with Mr. Williams. I don't know Mr. Williams. I've never met him. But I'm just saying there must be something there that caused you to think, I want to do this for myself, other than just for doing it.
Yeah, so there's a handful of things, and I would say it's less about what Roger Williams has done. It's more about what he has not done. I've had the same congressman for the last 12 years. I was in the old 25. I'm in the new 25. And the same reason I'm running for Congress is the same reason I started my company 3.5 years ago. I had a close friend of mine pass away to a fentanyl overdose about 3.5 years ago, and that caused me to leave my job as a mechanical engineer and start a company that's focused on preventing folks from getting addicted to their pain medications so that that doesn't happen. And along the way, I learned so much about drug trafficking, about human trafficking, about what's going on down at our southern border, how all of that mixes together, and how you can't really separate all of that. And I did my best to go out to members of Congress, members of the state house, state senate, all the way up to U.S. Senate, and try to educate them on drug trafficking, on sex trafficking, and on the reasons why we needed to secure our southern border. And it became very, very obvious to me that there was a lot of talk, but no action. And in fact, all of the representatives that I spoke to about drug trafficking, particularly about fentanyl getting into our schools and getting into the hands of our kids, they all fell into one of three categories. One, and this is the biggest category, the category of those who did not care. There's not a whole lot of big donor money in preventing our kids from getting their hands on fentanyl and not waking up the next morning. The second group, and this is the loudest group every single time, that is the group that knows absolutely nothing about the subject, but just wants to say that they were in favor of this so that they can get some votes. And then the third and final category was the category of individuals who they may have cared a little bit about the issue, but they were not willing to expend the political capital and take the political courage to actually get anything done.
I have to ask, what kind of political courage does it take to try to prevent fentanyl from coming into schools? That's not hardly a controversial topic in terms of there is no pro side to that question. Why would they be so reluctant?
Because if they rock the boat at all, and this is what I got from several of them, if they rock the boat at all, then that meant that they could lose a co-sponsor on another bill. Or Big Pharma would start pulling back their campaign donations to them. And so we're not taking any money from Big Pharma. Big Pharma hates me for a variety of reasons, including the work that I do in my private life, trying to prevent people from getting addicted to their meds. If you prevent people from getting addicted to medications, then it, one, prevents them from getting drugs that have come across the southern border, but it also prevents them from being hooked on these drugs that they're getting actually manufactured legally in the United States.
Which category would you put Mr. Williams in then?
I would say he's a combination.
Okay.
Because at first, my conversations with Mr. Williams' office were very much, this is not a big issue for us. And then I also looked and said, okay, even if, to give Roger Williams the benefit of the doubt, even if it was something he cared about, he would fall into the third category in that case. You know why? Because in the last 12 years, he's only ever passed one bill into law, and that was renaming the Burleson Post Office a decade ago. Since then, every single one of, I think, the 92 bills that he's sponsored in those 12 years, every single one of those others has failed at some level. The vast majority of them during the Trump administration. Vast majority of them when we had the House, the Senate, and the White House, nothing got done. The only bill he's ever passed into law was renaming the post office in Burleson under the Obama administration, the president that, again, he swore he would never work with. So he couldn't get anything done. And in fact, if you go back and you look at his public statements, when he's gone on podcasts, when he's gone on radio shows, when he's gone on TV shows in 2019 and 2020, his stance on the southern border was, in his words, I've never really been a big wall guy. Matthew Lucci, am a really big wall guy. We do need to build a wall. We do need to secure our southern border.
That's why I'm finding this issue kind of like one of these no-brainers. It's like nobody, except for political purposes and maybe on the left, could look at, what's going on at the border and say that's an acceptable situation. It's completely out of control. And I did a 2-part series on my podcast, and the amount of drugs that are being brought in the country are, I think, sometimes exaggerated in the press on the right, but it does happen. I mean, it is happening, and I think the press on the left tries to downplay it or make it a racial issue or something like that. But it does happen. I don't know whose stats we should believe, but there's no question that you have a border that's that porous, that some things will be smuggled in, and not just drugs, but also human beings.
Yeah.
And I just who could not be in favor of a more stricter border security? And then yesterday, I was very disappointed that the Supreme Court voted against Texas. Particularly, John Roberts does what he does best, which is waffle and wave when the New York Times says something mean about him. But I was a little surprised at Barrett, but it is what it is. Yeah. So I've looked at Mr. Williams' voting record, and it's pretty standard Republican. It's not. He's no rhino, and he's pretty much in line with whatever the party's voting on.
Well, I'll say that standard Republican is not good enough. Politics, as usual, is not good enough for those of us living here in the great state of Texas. Our children are dying of fentanyl. Over 2,000 individuals a day.
Can I intersect?
Go ahead.
You said a lot of this fentanyl is manufactured here in the United States. Is the majority of it, or just
no? What I was talking about earlier is when people get hooked on drugs like Percocet. Some of that is manufactured here in the U.S., and that's where Big Pharma continues to make their money.
All right.
But a lot of illicit fentanyl is manufactured overseas, smuggled in through Mexico, and then laced into illicit pills here in the United States. So that they become more addictive, and so that person keeps going back to that dealer. But there's no quality control. And that means that in one pill that you get from a dealer on the street corner or your cousin's friend, it might have enough to give you a little bit extra buzz, but the next pill might be enough to kill you.
I just, kind of reiterate a point I was making, is that some of this has been so distorted by both the left and the right about, it doesn't happen. No, it happens all the time. It's hard to sometimes have a figure. Do you have a figure of how much comes into this country?
Well, it comes in waves. Okay. So I couldn't tell you exactly how much comes into this country. What we do know is that in Tarrant County, someone passes away to a fentanyl-related drug overdose every 2.5 hours.
Good grief.
And in our congressional district, and we found this out by talking to sheriffs all over our district, to police chiefs all over our district, from Arlington out to Comanche, is that there are at least 2,000 individuals being trafficked for sex every single week in our congressional district alone.
And it's your contention that Congress as a whole, but particularly our representative, has basically said there's not much I can do about it, or it's not in my best interest. Is that what your point would be?
My point is there's a lot of inaction on that front.
Okay.
There's been an incredible amount of inaction on that front. And I was on Greg Cooper's show over at the Texas Transparency Project last week, talking about one of the many reasons for that.
Well, I know that I've heard the name of that. I wasn't familiar with Mr. Cooper, but I've heard of that outfit. Yeah. Well, I just, when I think of Roger Williams, I think about basically your standard Republican who votes as he's told. But you're right, though. When I've discussed this, I couldn't for the life of me think of anytime I've ever read his name in the media of being a leader of a particular project or leader of a piece of legislation. The only time I've ever seen his name in the mainstream media, if you will, is I think they had a hearing on the Small Business Administration, and that's about it. And I'm not expecting. I don't want my member of Congress to be like Matt Gaetz, throwing fireballs everywhere, or like an AOC who was on Twitter all the time. I don't need a show horse. I need a workhorse. And I'm not sure sometimes I'm getting that.
Yeah, we're definitely not getting that in District 25. We haven't gotten that for at least the last 12 years. I mean, when we look at it, like I said, only one bill he's passed into law in the last 12 years. This past summer, he missed more votes than 99% of Congress. He's not showing up to work, and we're still paying him $174,000 a year. Plus the $1.4 million that he took in PPP money to bail out his $60 million a year car dealership. So we're putting a whole lot of money on somebody when in any business, I'm a business owner, he's a business owner, and I'm sure if you asked him, hey, if you had one employee who didn't show up to work or only showed up to work every now and then and didn't actually accomplish anything for the last decade, at what point do you fire him, and at what point do you stop giving him $174,000 a year?
You are taking on an incumbent, which the stats will show you're definitely behind the eight ball. You know that already. You probably knew that when you signed the paper to join this district and this race. He also is one of the wealthiest members of Congress. How do you plan to overcome those advantages he has?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we're actually going out and we're talking to folks. We've been to all 13 counties in the 25th Congressional District several times. We've been going to as many candidate forums, as many meet and greets, as many just coffee house meetings as we possibly can since this last April. We've been challenging Roger Williams to come and debate since May, and they've refused and refused and refused and refused. And, they told one of the organizations that reached out to them that they didn't see the point. And so what I'd like to say is, if you don't see the point in coming up and opposing someone who's trying to oppose you, one, that shows that you're a coward. And two, it shows that there's no point in voting for you because you're not willing to come and stand for your record.
I was going to ask you that question, maybe not at this point, but later in the show, if you have any joint appearances planned. What's interesting to me is that for the first time that I can recollect in a long time, I saw advertisements for Roger Williams in Burleson on billboards, because he's never really had to run.
Yeah.
He's had very nominal opposition from the Democratic side. And I don't remember, there's a couple of primaries he had no opposition at all.
Yep.
And you're trying to make this happen. It's how you go to these coffee shops, you go to these town halls, you go to these other meetings. What are they telling you?
Well, in the vast majority of this district, folks are telling me that they don't even know their congressman. They've never heard from him. They've never met him. We talked to several sheriffs that have been in his district for a while and have said, we may have received a phone call a long time ago, but it was from his office and never spoke to him. And so what we're getting is a lot of folks across the district who are sick and tired of the way Congress is going, sick and tired of the fact that they don't have anybody actually up there representing their interests. And they want something better. I mean, they look at Roger Williams on Conservative Review, and he's got a 76% Liberty score, meaning that on the major bills, he votes with Democrats about 24% of the time. That's not working for us down here. Standing up when we had the House, the Senate, and the White House and saying that he's never really been a big wall guy and he would vote against the border wall, that's not working for us here in District 25. It's not working for us in Texas. Continuing to vote for continuing resolutions, which he did until I hit him on that, and suddenly he changed his tune. But voting to suspend the debt ceiling and allow unlimited government spending through 2025 so that the government can continue spending as much money as they want, they're just going to be borrowing it from investors who otherwise would have invested in American businesses. And so that money is going to Washington, D.C. to work for Washington, D.C. now, instead of working for us here at home. So I'd argue that all of those things that I'm hearing everywhere, that's Congress, and particularly our Congressman Roger Williams, not working for us here at home.
Well, I was going to ask you some of the policy questions. And, as far as the border situation, what would be your preferred solution to that?
Yeah, there's three things that we need to do with the southern border. One, we need to build the wall. When we go down there, and I've been down there several times in the last year and a half to survey the southern border, the portions of the southern border, particularly the lower Rio Grande Valley, they had a terrible illegal immigration problem until they completed more section of border wall than anywhere else on the southern border. And it helped to funnel that migration and that illegal immigration into choke points so that Border Patrol could do their job more effectively. But what also happened was cartels started trafficking folks through different parts of the border. So walls work. Areas that don't have wall have massive problems.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I did a show on immigration and whatnot, and it's hard for a lot of people to really think of this. We need to use these kind of drastic solutions because, there is an element of humanitarianism involved. But what's happening down in the South Texas cannot continue. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier, I was kind of disappointed in the Supreme Court ruling. I would be voting in favor of Texas having a more proactive hand in dealing with this problem, because Joe Biden sure ain't. Yeah, they have no interest in it all, and for various reasons. And but anyway, I kind of interjected. You had two other points you'd make.
The two others are end, catch, and release. There should be no reason why we pull up our phone and in 90 seconds or less get them a court date 6 to 9 years in the future, and good luck if they show up, and then give them a bus ticket wherever they want to go in the country. That practice needs to stop. Mm-hmm. What we also need to be doing is reinstating the Remain in Mexico policy. So for those who are seeking asylum in the United States, wherever they touch ground first, whatever safe country they touch down in first, they should stay there while their asylum process is being adjudicated in the U.S. until their actual court date for asylum.
They did that under Trump, and also had the Title 42 with the COVID, and then Mr. Biden did away with both those, and it's just blown up. And, this immigration problem really is what's ironic or tragic, really, is the people that are impacted the most by it are not going to be people in, the wealthier parts of town. Yeah. It's going to be in the poorer parts of town. Their schools, their hospitals, their clinics, whatever public services they need. They're going to just inundate those areas. And so, you'd be surprised how many Hispanic and Black voters they're turning to the Republican Party because of this, because they're the ones that are bearing the burden of this kind of problem. But, it's been a problem for a long time. It amazes me how Joe Biden is just so oblivious to it. Or he's either oblivious or willfully ignorant.
I would go with willfully ignorant. Okay. I mean, there's no way that you can be in politics for 40 plus years and not understand what's going on at the southern border. And I'll say this, Democrats and Republicans have both campaigned on border security at various points in history. It does not take 40 years to secure the border. It does not take 12 years to secure the border. It takes having some political courage, growing a pair, and actually doing what your constituents elect you to do, and that is to keep this country safe, and then get out of the way of small businesses in the community, stop over-regulating them, stop taking their money, stop overspending so that the private money goes to Congress and paying off federal government debt, and instead goes to invest and fund activity in the community. That's what we need to be doing. But our current congressman has not seemed to grow a pair in the last 12 years, and Congress as a whole hasn't grown a pair in the last 12 years. And then Joe Biden, I would argue, never had a pair.
I've said that
40.
more. I've said that more than once on the show, that he's always, this is what Joe Biden's been for 40 years, is wherever the wind blows him, he's right there. He wants to be popular more than right. Even he just basically his whole 40+ Senate career is like, wherever the Democrat Party is, I'm going to be at the center of it, whether it's far left like it's become. I can't tell you how many people I know, Democrats and Republicans, that feel like maybe their parties are not what they grew up voting for back in the day. There's certain elements of the Republican Party that are too far right for them.
Yeah.
And there's certain elements of the Democrats that are much too far to the left for them. How would you characterize yourself?
I would say that I am a constitutional conservative.
Okay.
And that means if it's in the Constitution, that's what I stand for. If it's not in the Constitution, that's not the job of the federal government. I mean, you as a government professor, you should know that the vast majority of those who call themselves conservative will cite the First Amendment, they'll cite the Second Amendment. But as soon as they get elected, they seem to forget the 10th. They seem to forget that anything not in the Constitution explicitly is left up to the states and to the people.
I assume then you're following that Chevron case pretty closely. Last Wednesday's arguments, and for the listening audience, the Chevron case, not to be too inside about it, but it basically, if they decide in favor of the plaintiffs, then it would greatly restrict the administrators and the bureaucracies from interpreting the law as they see fit. It had to be more explicitly authorized by a congressional law, which I am in favor of, because I like I said, when I teach this, it's amazing to me just how much authority these administrative bureaucracies have with zero accountability. I got farming kin, and they the EPA and all that, they just hammer them, and basically there's no ability to fight back, and so I'm hoping that case is positively resolved.
As am I. I mean, we've had this ballooning government, and there's a saying that the government only gets bigger. Well, does it have to? I don't think it does if everyone who says they're a conservative, whether they go down to Austin or whether they go over to City Hall or whether they go to Washington, D.C., if everyone who said they were conservative was actually advocating not just for the First Amendment rights and the Second Amendment rights, the Fourth and the Fifth, but also for the 10th Amendment. Hey, this isn't in the Constitution. Give it back to the states. Give it back to the people.
Well, they use the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, Commerce Clause quite often to justify a lot of this.
Yes, they do. And
sometimes, and I get their arguments say, well, you can't expect Congress to be able to micromanage everything. My response is, well, then have less to manage.
Exactly.
That's the way I look at it. Is like if this job has become too large for Congress to have, pretty clear laws that regulate what's going on with accountability attached. Because if you vote for something, somebody's going to be unhappy, as opposed to shuffling it off to an administration. And this leads into another point. And I've been yelling about this on this show for a long time. Congress, for the last 40 years, has abdicated just about everything that they are responsible for. War-making powers and budgeting powers and all that administrative thing that we've been just talking about. It seems like, what does Congress do anymore? Because they just basically pawned it off either to the executive branch or maybe the judicial branch to bail them out. And that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, it's one of mine as well, and it's a concern that I get every time I knock on doors all over this district, from Arlington to Burleson down to Cleburne and out to Graham and Jacksboro. We hear this everywhere. The government's gotten big, and then they're actually just voting to give some unelected bureaucrats the power to really run this country.
Right.
And it's something that I will be fighting full force against, to return the responsibility, because as a party that believes in personal responsibility, maybe look at the document that says what your responsibilities are and do those responsibilities. And let's get rid of this bloated bureaucracy, including several of the unconstitutional departments within the federal government.
Well, there's one department in particular that drives me a bit nuts. As a teacher, it's the Department of Education. It's because I don't know if they're really there for the students of any means. They're there for bureaucracies and for teacher unions and for, they're put in philosophies and paradigms that most people will not accept if you explained it to them. But they don't understand, they don't keep up with this. Only dorks like me do that. So that's one of the concerns I have, is that the administration's ability just to be involved in just every aspect of your life is, and then you go to some states where it's even worse, like California or Illinois. It's like, wait a minute, our freedom is just diminishing by degrees. And I do get concerned about that. Now, I'm not opposed to having, some monitoring on our air and water, make sure they're appropriately clean, whatever else. What I don't like is the fact is that, it's dependent upon the mood of the administrator, how he or she woke up that morning.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how and then I know there's a rule-making process, and they got, stakeholder meetings, and they got, comment time and all this other stuff. It never slows the juggernaut down. It just, runs the clock out. And so that's what bothers me. Let's kind of like to switch gears and talk about foreign policy. Now, one of the things about Congress has done, I mentioned, is they basically have abdicated every military power they have. In Article 1, Section 8, there are 6 different clauses that refer to Congress in some military aspect, not just to declare war, but also to set the rules of conduct and what to do with prisoners of war and how to fund it and all this other business. Yet we haven't had that happen in 70 years. Let's take the bombing in Yemen. A lot of people think it's a necessary thing. Would you support Mr. Biden doing that, or would you rather go through the congressional process?
I want to make sure that any conflict that we get into globally goes through the correct constitutional channels. Now, I know that foreign policy, according to the Constitution, is the purview of the executive branch. It is the purview of the President of the United States. And I would much rather a President of the United States who actually has a pair and will stand up and say, nothing is off the table. So Iran, you better think before you act.
Right.
Russia, you better think before you act. But I also would like to have a Congress that accepts their responsibility to declare war, their responsibility to advise and consent on military action globally. And so I know personally, I don't have the ability to declare war. As a congressional body, we could declare a war. Should we be in war right now? I don't believe so. But what I do want to make sure is that we put enough pressure on the executive branch to stay out of foreign conflicts that don't serve U.S. interests.
Does that include Ukraine?
I would say that would include Ukraine.
See, I'm on the record as being supportive of our of the people of Ukraine and Zelensky and understand the implications of that. You know, Zelensky and his crowd are no saints, but I do support opposing Putin. I do support opposing Xi Jinping in Taiwan. So, you know, we talk about these votes about aid for foreign countries in their military conflicts. How would you vote on that?
Yeah, I would vote no. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that there should be no reason that Ukrainian citizens who fled the country before the war started should be getting paid pensions from our tax dollars. I am in support of making sure that the allies that we have globally, anyone that we have signed a treaty with before they get into a conflict, that we uphold our word. Israel, for example. We uphold our word and say, look, if our treaty said that you can buy an unlimited amount of munitions from us under these circumstances, then we have to uphold that treaty. Because globally, on the international stage, America is strong as two things. One, our military, and two, our word. If, God forbid, a NATO country gets attacked under Article 5, we're drawn into that. Now, we have to be drawn into that. We have to join that fight if we get fought, if we get attacked.
If I can interject, Mr. Trump wants to get out of NATO if he's elected. Would you support leaving NATO?
I would support a restructuring of NATO.
Okay.
I think we need to restructure the vast majority of our treaties worldwide because a lot of them no longer serve U.S. interests. They served U.S. interests decades ago. But, you know, for example, if we get into a treaty with Luxembourg, for example, it's very hard to make the argument to me that if someone invades Luxembourg that we need to go into a global war to defend them. What we need to make sure is that anyone that we tie ourselves to that strongly, where we have an Article 5 type provision that is actually so crucial to have that alliance with them that we would put our entire country on the line for them, which the vast majority of those, I would argue, in NATO right now, we do not have that balance there where we are putting way more on the line than they are.
Well, I'm just thinking, though, the reason I support our adventures, if you will, in Ukraine is that if Putin is not stopped there, the Baltic states will be at risk, Poland would be at risk, and regardless of what we might want our treaty to say, our treaty does say that we would go to bat for these guys if they got invaded by Putin. And, you know, and Putin is dead set on expanding the Russian Empire, the old Soviet Empire. So I wouldn't you rather fight in Ukraine than in Poland or some NATO ally?
I would rather fight alongside our allies instead of funding what might turn into a decades-long war in a country that we have no business being in. We had no military treaty signed with ahead of time. I want to make sure that we are upholding our word to the countries that we have said that we would help defend, including having the munitions ready, because we've depleted our own resources.
That's very true. I read that we are unprepared for any kind of long-term situation. And when we say long term, we're talking about we have like a month's supply in some cases.
Yeah. And so I agree with you. We have to be defending our ally, Taiwan. We have to be working with Israel in upholding that treaty with them. We can't fulfill our obligations in those treaties after what we've done in Ukraine. And in the meantime, we are mortgaging our own kids' future. Congress is mortgaging our kids' future so that we can send all of our weapon systems, all of our munitions to a country on the other side of the world that we did not have a treaty with.
Oh, that you did mention Israel. Is this not the same kind of situation you have with Israel like you do with Ukraine? Is Israel a different case?
Israel's a different case because we had a treaty with them.
Is that the only reason?
That's the biggest reason that I have.
The reason I also have, it's not just because, we read about it in our scripture and all that, okay, but also because they're the only democracy in the Middle East, and they've been our best ally in the Middle East. They've been a troublesome ally sometimes and a pain in the rump sometimes, but they're a lot more reliable than most of the Arab states that we've tried to make relationships with. But
there's a lot of good things we can say about our relationship with Israel. We've tested and perfected a lot of our military and agricultural technology in Israel and brought it back to the United States. Also, if you want to develop a missile defense system and test it and tweak it, Israel's a great place to do that because they're getting rockets shot at them all the time. And so that's been a great strategic partnership in addition to providing military intelligence to the United States about what's going on in the Middle East. Now, I have my personal religious beliefs about why we need to be defending the Holy Land.
Well, that's kind of mine too. I mean, it's hard to separate my foreign policy from my belief in Scripture. And, I know that for a lot of people, that's not a basis of foreign policy is because of Sunday school. But I do believe that is the land that God promised them. Now, I'm not of the mindset that the state of Israel is, does everything right or we support everything they do right or wrong. But I do believe that the Jewish nation
should exist.
Yeah. And, you mentioned also about mortgaging the children's future. I was going to segue into that as well. You mentioned earlier about the raising of the debt limit or continuing resolutions. That on that matter, it drives me absolutely crazy that we fund the government like we do, and we've been doing it for years.
Yeah,
and it's atrocious. No business could ever operate just funding it the way they do. But what's the alternative? The
alternative is, and I was talking with Chris Salcedo on his show yesterday.
Oh, you talked to him? Okay, okay. I remember him from BAP days.
Yeah, he's down in KSEV Houston now.
Okay,
and on Newsmax.
Okay,
but we were talking about this yesterday, and Congress hasn't actually passed a real budget since 1996.
Right.
And it comes down to the fact that our members of Congress are so lazy. They get comfortable where they're at. They get comfortable with continuing resolutions and not actually passing a budget. They get comfortable with every few months or every year going and arguing about a debt ceiling to see how they can finagle something because that is what they've gotten used to. That honestly, for a lot of those folks, that's what they inherited. And a lot of those folks have been in Congress for decades. Very few members of Congress right now remember being there when the last budget was passed. And those who've been in Congress old enough to be there when the last budget was passed probably don't remember what they ate for breakfast that morning.
Yeah. Well, it bothers me that, it's very clear how it's supposed to work. Congress is supposed to come up with a budget, and the president's going to suggest legislation to them, as it says in the first article, and the second article, I suppose. And but it's like we go every 3 or 4 months to go through this drama and soap opera. Oh, the budget's going to shut the government down and all this other routine. We just passed one last week. That's and it's good for 6 weeks. And we're going to be doing this again. And it's like, this is ridiculous. And, there's a reason why most people have such a poor opinion of Congress is because we don't act like that in our own lives. And we don't act, and then there's also the juvenile aspect of it when they get on and holler and yell and get on Twitter and all that business. But I'm just saying that it drives me crazy that they can't do what is plainly their responsibility.
Yeah.
And, so we're American people, and I'm speaking for a lot of them, I hope. we're dang tired of these dramas every 3 months or so. Let's pass a budget. And then when it comes to the debt and deficit, and when they throw around $1 trillion like it's chump change, how can there not be a financial reckoning of cataclysmic proportions?
There will be soon. I mean, what we've seen in the last year is the bond rating for federal bonds has been decreased. That means the interest rate's going to have to go up on those bonds so that they can compete against bonds from other countries and private bonds as well.
Right.
So what a lot of folks don't realize, how the government is funded is either through printing more money or through bonds. And a bond is basically them saying, hey, here's a piece of paper. You give us $10 for it now, we'll give you $12 in 5 years. Now, who's putting their money on those bonds? Those are, the vast majority of them are private investors. Right. Some of them are international. Some of them are here in the United States. A lot of them are
institutional investors. The Social Security is a big holder, and the Fed's a big holder, and state and local governments. But what bothers me is that about all of this is that $1 trillion is unimaginable, and we owe 32 plus, probably now 33, and we're never going to be able to pay that back without some tremendous sacrifices. And I don't know if our politicians are brave enough to tell the people, hey, you're going to have to sacrifice. You're going to have do without some of the things that we've been giving you all these years on somebody else's dollar.
Yeah, we've got to be cutting a lot of programs. We also have to be changing the way we do annual budgeting. We need to get rid of the use it or lose it budgeting that's caused, for example, the Bureau of Land Management to buy thousands of coffee makers at the end of the year so they can keep up their budget so they get the same amount the next year. That practice needs to stop. And even just doing that, according to the Congressional Budget Office, would cut the annual budget anywhere from 2 to 4%, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when we're talking on the order of $4 to $6 trillion, that is what the budget is right now. If we continue with these continuing resolutions, we're going to be spending about $6 trillion this next year. 2 to 4% of that is hundreds of billions of dollars that we're saving.
Well, the biggest drivers, though, of the deficit are Social Security and Medicare. And Trump has said in the last election, when he was elected in 2016, it was off the table, and he said as much for 2024. And expect Biden and the Democrats to do something about entitlement programs without altering those. Say we saved $200 billion by cutting spending in other areas. That's 10%, of the deficit. The only way we can really get a handle on that is we're going to have to really reevaluate our entitlement programs. Yep. Would you be willing to do that?
I would absolutely be willing to reevaluate them.
That's not popular at all. That's why AARP goes in there and intimidates a lot of the members of Congress.
And what I'll say is I'm not elected to represent AARP. I'm elected to represent the people of the 25th Congressional District. And the people here in the 25th Congressional District, the vast majority of them are upset about entitlement programs. They're upset about Social Security. And I know that this is the third rail of politics. And, if my opponent is smart, they're going to go ahead and cut this from your show today.
Hey, just remember where you heard it first.
Yeah, just remember where you heard it first. I called it. I absolutely called it. I'm smart enough to know that when I say something controversial, they're going to use it. So here's what they're going to use. And they're going to take parts out of context. And I'm, again, calling that as well. But if you look at Social Security in particular, that was a program that Congress promised, we're not going to touch this money. And then a couple of Congresses later, they said, wait a second, look at all this money we get to touch.
Right.
So anytime the government manages your money, they're going to get their grubby little hands all over it. We need to get that money out of the purview of the federal government and move it into a more privatized system. If you just took the same money that you're spending on Social Security payments every single month while you're working, and for 10 years, you just invested that in the stock market, you would make about 12 to 15% more. So even their professional money managers and stuff like that, they're losing you money compared to inflation. Your money is going to be worth a whole lot less when you actually get it.
Right.
And people my generation are basically 90+% of us believe that we're never going to see a dime of it. So what we need to do is, I'm a person who believes in promises and fulfilling your promises. When you started working and you were given the little line item on there saying, hey, we're going to take this amount, and at 62 when you retire, you get this money. Or at 65 when you retire, you get this money. And it's going to be this much every month. That is a contract from the federal government. That is a promise from the government that you're going to get that. And I believe the United States needs to fulfill its promises around the world and here at home. So what I would like to do is, if you're 35 years old and you've been working for 10 years, that 10 years stays in Social Security. And after that, 36 beyond, that goes over to a privatized system. If you're 38, same thing. We just, from one point on, everything that you've already put away in Social Security, that'll come back to you. But everything that comes in after that, we put over into a private investment.
Well, I've heard privatization being used as a solution before, and I think it has a lot to say for it. Everybody's concerned about what's going to happen if the market crashes, but we won't have time to get into all that right now because we're getting close. But it's going to be very, very difficult unless the leaders of the Republican Party really do this. So when Trump says we need to, any kind of cuts or tax increases with the entitlements are off the table, that does make your job harder. And that's why, and it gives them political cover. Somebody could say, well, I'd like to, but, the president says, or the Republican nominee says.
Well, personally, I'm sick and tired of politicians saying, well, hey, look, I've got political cover now. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
I would prefer to have politicians who actually worked for us, people who were not career politicians trying to save their jobs, but people who are everyday folks trying to save this country.
Assuming you're elected and assuming Mr. Trump is elected, would you ever take a stance that Mr. Trump would oppose?
Probably this one.
Yeah. Okay. Because a lot of Republicans don't. And that's what drives people crazy also, because when Trump was president, the deficit wasn't a problem. Now when Biden's president for the Republicans, it is a problem. But this has been a bipartisan problem for 40 years. This has been going on my entire adult life, regardless who president was, regardless who ran Congress. I mean, they both ran up the tab. And so, but I just wonder, what it looks like for me with the Republican Party is like Trump directs the Republican Party, and that's how they're going to vote. But you're going to tell us here.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you here that go on my website, look at what I'm standing for, securing our border, fighting back against inflation, protecting innocent life, fighting child trafficking, caring for our veterans. Grade me like a college professor. And if I don't get an A, then come back and say that I fail you like the previous congressman. And then work to elect somebody else. Work to get that congressman out if they fail you. That's the way politics should be. It shouldn't be whatever party leadership tells me to do. Now, I support President Trump for this upcoming election. I'm going to be voting for him a third time. However, if he does anything that is outside of his constitutional bounds, I will fight for our constitutional rights. I will fight for the 10th Amendment, even if it is unpopular in my own party.
I hope so, because that's what we lack. Both parties are like that. I look at the Democrats, and boy, Pelosi gets them in line, and they rant and they rave on Twitter, and then they vote the way they're told. And then as far as the Republicans, it just seems like that Trump so dominates the party sometimes that they don't think for themselves, or they don't take their own districts into consideration. What's best for my district? And so that's always been a real problem for me, is that the House is supposed to represent the people and not a person in the form of Biden or Trump or anybody else you want to throw in there. But that's not the way it's been working. You want to do this again?
I would love to do this again.
Okay, I got a couple open dates. This is election season, so I have a few open dates before the primary on Tuesday, March 5th, I believe.
Tuesday, March 5th. Early voting starts February 20th and runs through March 1st.
Yeah, it's changed a lot since I was a kid. My first vote was for Ronald Reagan. Of course, my dad said he wouldn't pay my tuition if I didn't do it likewise. So, no, that was an easy vote for me. He's still one of my very favorite presidents. But In the last remaining couple of minutes, won't you tell, you can look right at the camera if you like, and tell the viewers and listeners what you'd like them to know.
Yeah, one thing that I would really like to say, my name is Matthew Lucci. I'm running for Congress in the 25th Congressional District. If you like the way this country's been going for the last 12 years, if you like the fact that your congressman opposed the border wall, if you like the fact that your congressman accepted massive campaign donations from Jeffrey Epstein's company, if you like the fact that your congressman has only ever passed one bill into law, then go ahead and vote for his reelection. If you're looking for something different, if you're looking for someone who is willing to be put accountable to you and actually uphold our conservative constitutional values, I would encourage you to check me out. Check me out online, Matthew Lucci, or go to luccifortexas.com.
I really have enjoyed this. This has been great. I enjoy these kind of conversations, and I think the more people you can reach, I think the more people are going to respond to your message. I know it's tough, because you are fighting an incumbent, but I think this is not your normal high-profile incumbent. I think you have a chance, and you certainly seem to be putting a lot of effort into it. But we'll do this again before the primary day. But I appreciate you coming in, and I really learned a lot.
Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, alrighty. And we'll see y'all. See what I got going on. What is the day? Right now, I have an open date on Thursday. I am talking to somebody, but I don't want to say it's just a local business, not just a local business, but I don't want to. They're trying to make sure their schedule works. If it doesn't, then I'll rant about something. And then next week, I have Tim Good, who's running for the Republican nomination for district attorney. And let's see who else I got. I know I got.
You got Dale Hanna coming up the week after.
Yeah, February 8th. That's 99% sure. It depends on if something happens during the court that day. But yeah, I got him. Do you know Dale Hanna?
I know both Dale Hanna and Tim Good, and I'm pulling for Good in that race.
Okay. And I'll get to hear all about his stances. Also, we have Crazy Eights, which is a local charitable outfit, and they do work with the homeless. And then we have Jessica Valley Reams coming in to talk about her program again, Fitability TX. But I got in February. I got all three of the declared candidates for city council. So we'll see if anybody else shows up. This is a lot of fun. Thank you, Taylor. And
always.
All right, and we'll see y'all Thursday.